Today, we're digging into a book with a title that's, well, designed to get a reaction. Socialism Sucks. It follows two economists who decided to ditch the classroom to test some really complex economic theories in a, let's just say, an unconventional setting, bars all around the world. Yep, the full title is Socialism Sucks. Two economists drink their way through the unfree world. The authors, Robert Lawson and Benjamin Powell, literally went on a global tour to see how different economic systems actually work in the real world, one beer at a time. And that brings us to the book's central and, kind of quirky premise. Can you really judge a country's economy by the quality and price of its beer? Well, the authors think so. They believe it can tell us a much bigger story, acting as this simple, down-to-earth indicator for super complex things like supply chains, price signals, and even market competition. So what would possess two serious academics to conduct this kind of bar-hopping experiment? Their goal was to yank economics out of the lecture hall and apply a really simple, real-world test to all these complicated ideas. So these are our guides, Robert Lawson and Benjamin Powell, and they're serious economists. But they're proposing a pretty simple thesis. You can learn a whole lot about a country's prosperity just by checking out the availability and the cost of a beer. So their book is kind of part travelogue, part on-the-ground economic analysis. All right, so where does their tour of this so-called unfree world even begin? Well, the book's first stop is Venezuela, a country that, not too long ago was actually being praised by some as a real socialist success story. To really set the stage for their first stop, the authors point to quotes just like this one. They highlight how, back in the early 2010s, some Western figures and publications were pretty much raving about what they were calling Venezuela's economic miracle. According to the book, this was the positive story being told at the time. But then, the book slams you with the contrast between that praise and the on-the-ground reality the authors say they actually saw. They describe a country just crippled by widespread shortages, mass hunger, and a currency in total freefall. They argue it was a completely different world from the socialist paradise narrative they'd set out to investigate. And to really illustrate the human cost of all this, the book points to a pretty shocking statistic. Citing a university survey, the authors report that 24 pounds was the average weight loss for Venezuelans in 2017 alone, something they attribute directly to the country's severe food shortages. And to get a handle on the sheer scale of the hyperinflation, the authors share this just wild anecdote. They describe how people had literally stopped counting big sums of cash and started weighing it instead. At one point, they note, you'd need a 5-foot-tall stack of the highest denomination bills just to equal $100. Next up, the authors turn to what they call the most visually dramatic example in their entire book, the Korean Peninsula. They frame it as this perfect natural experiment, right? You've got one people, two different countries, and two radically different economic paths. Now, what's really incredible here is how it captures that famous nighttime satellite view. You see South Korea just a blaze of light, lit up like a Christmas tree, a real testament to its industrial power. And then there's North Korea, which is almost total darkness. Just a sea of blackness with this one single pinpoint of light in Pyongyang. The authors use this to frame the massive, massive difference in wealth and well-being between the two nations. But, the book doesn't just focus on struggling economies. The authors then go looking for a counterexample, a country they hold up as a successful transition away from a Soviet-style system. And for them, that place is the country of Georgia. They present it as a kind of model for how a nation can pivot from a centrally planned economy to a market-based one, and they detail these sweeping reforms they believe made it all happen. So how'd Georgia pull it off, according to the book? Well, the architect of the reforms, a guy named Kaka Bendukidze, pushed through what the authors basically describe as a libertarian's dream agenda. It meant systematically shrinking the government, selling off state-owned companies, drastically slashing taxes and bureaucracy, and completely freeing up the labor market. So for their final chapter, the authors bring their journey all the way back home. They wanted to investigate what they see as the rising popularity of socialist ideas right here in the United States. And to get a real first-hand look, they kind of went undercover. They went to a big socialism conference in Chicago because they wanted to see for themselves what ideas were really driving the movement in America today. And what they found, they argue, was a focus that seemed really different from the traditional economic definition of socialism. They list off session titles just like these to make their point that the conference seemed to be heavily centered on cultural and identity issues, rather than, say, the state ownership of factories. So, after all the traveling, all the beers, and all the analysis, what's the author's final conclusion? What's the big takeaway from this global economic pub crawl? Okay, to really get their conclusion, it's absolutely crucial to know how the authors define their terms. As you see here, for them, socialism means state ownership and central control of production. The land, the factories, the whole shebang. In contrast, they define capitalism as private ownership and free markets. For them, this distinction is the bedrock of their entire argument. So, based on those definitions, their conclusion is this. While no country is purely one or the other, they're all mixed economies on a spectrum. The book argues that their journey provides pretty clear evidence that the more a country leans toward free markets and private property, the more prosperous its people tend to be. And they end their book right back where they started, with beer. It's a cheeky final line that just perfectly captures the spirit of their whole project, and it leaves us with a simple thought. What can we learn from the world around us if we just know where to look? Cheers!